Good morning, everybody. My name is Kishore Mamubani. I'm the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this early morning session on China-India relations in a changing world. In keeping with the past traditions, I will make 3 points briefly before we hear from the two speakers, and I'll follow from them. But the first point I want to make, which is a very critical point to make, is that we believe that while today clearly the most important great power relationship is that between the United States and China. This is inevitable since the United States has the world's largest economy, China has the second largest economy. But tomorrow, the most important relationship will be that between China and India. Of course, it's only a matter of time before these two economies become the two largest economies in the world, and that will be perfectly natural because from the year 1 to the year 1820, they had the two largest economies in the world. So the past 200 years of world history, which have been a major historical aberration, will naturally come to an end, and so we'll have to focus on the China-India relationship. So my second point is that the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy has decided that since this will be the most important relationship of the future, we should start preparing for it now. So we have made a very deep and profound commitment to studying and understanding the China-India relationship. And I can tell you as a matter of historical record, since actually next week we are marking here at the school the first anniversary of the passing away of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, that he himself was personally invested in trying to understand the China-India relationship better, and in also trying to help it. In fact, the first meeting that we ever had in Singapore, we've had it now for 5 years, of Chinese and Indian academics and officials, was actually hosted by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and he got personally involved in it. So we've kept up this tradition in the school. And we, of course, have this annual seminar. We also have China-India brief, which I hope that you are also looking at. Also today, this morning, after our discussion, we'll also be launching this book that we have just come out with, which has been edited by Kanti Bajpai, Huang Jing, and myself. In fact, Kanti and Jing will be saying a few words about this book also. And I hope, if I'm right, the book will be on sale also outside. It's very cheap. It's only $140, something like that. But it's worth it. It's worth it. So anyway, but that's an indication of the school's commitment, and I can assure you that we are very blessed in having funding for this, so we can carry on in perpetuity the China-India studies at our school. Now with that, let me come to this morning, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the two speakers. And I would describe them as heroes because neither of them was supposed to speak this morning. In fact, I think from the Indian side it was supposed to be Ambassador Shyam Saran, who unfortunately fell ill. And from the Chinese side, Dr. Ruan was supposed to come. And I must say, on the Chinese side, General Yao has been so wonderful because she stepped in literally at the last minute, which I mean last night. So we've had some very exciting time putting together this panel. So I want to, so if you don't mind, a special round of applause for the two heroes who stepped in at the last minute. Let me say a brief word about both of them. Ambassador Jayant Prasad joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1976, had a very distinguished career, serving as ambassador to Afghanistan, Algeria, Nepal, and also the UN Conference on Disarmament. He's currently the Director General at the Institute for... What was that? He's currently India's ambassador, currently Director General, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, IDSA, in New Delhi. He was also, by the way, and this is amazing, one thing that the three of us share in common is that I was a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs in 91, 92. Jayant was a fellow there, I think 98, 99. And General Yao was a fellow there 2009. So all three of us have been fellows at the same center. We share that in common. Now, Major General Yao Yunju is now Director of the Center on China-American Defense Relations and a senior researcher at the Asia Pacific Office in the Department of World Studies, both of which are the People's Liberation Army's Academy of Military Science in China. She first joined the PLA in 1970. She holds a master's degree from the PLA's Foreign Languages Institute and attained a PhD in military science from the PLA Academy of Military Science. In addition to spending a year at Harvard, she's also spent a year at the School of Oriental and African Studies at London University. In 2007, she was elected as a member of the 17th CCP Congress and was chosen as one of the top 10 outstanding women in China. Now you know how many women there are in China, right? So to be elected on the top 10 is quite a big deal. But I told her this morning, I said, I know exactly why you were selected. Because she doesn't know, she probably doesn't remember this. I met her many years ago actually. I was in Davos, and sometimes in Davos they organize these small dinner discussions, and she was then a colonel, I think, not even a general yet. And at this small dinner, she was asked some incredibly tough, difficult and challenging questions. And boy, did she respond well. And I said to myself, this woman is going to go far, and I was proven right. So, again, round of applause for both of them. So, we begin with Jayant, who will speak for 10 to 15 minutes. He's kindly agreed not to go beyond 15 minutes, and then General Yao Yunju will speak for 15 minutes, then I'll come and say something which I'm going to think about in the next 30 minutes. Okay, Jayant.
Good morning. That was a breezy introduction, Kishore. Thank you for it. India-China relations in a changing world is an idea, the focus on it, the time has come for it, as Kishore said. We have a very conscious sense in India that for India the most important bilateral relationship is the one that it has with China. And it is, in a sense, also one of our biggest foreign and security policy challenges. The problem that we face currently in India is a very simple one, and I thought I'll be upfront about it. That when we began to unshackle our economy in the early 1990s, and 10 years from that point in early 2000, when we looked at the global situation, we found that in terms of comprehensive national power and in terms of where we were headed at the time, if you looked at the top 3 countries, let's say in the next 30-40 years, USA, China and India, the distance between USA and China seemed to be the same as the distance between India and China. And 15 years down the line, when Indians look at the situation, the distance between China and US has narrowed, and the distance between India and China has grown, which poses particular challenges for the Indian national leadership. It's also interesting how we look at China in the sense of there's a pressure on the Indian national leadership to do as well as China has done. And our chief economic advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, wrote this famous book called Eclipse, where he speaks about a hypothetical situation at the opening chapter of the book, where an American president walks into the office of the IMF head and asks for a 3 trillion balance of payment adjustment loan, a short-term loan, and the person who is seated in the chair of the managing director happens to be a Chinese banker. So that's the image that we have of China in India, and it's a great example for India to follow. So that's to give you the context of the relationship. We took a look at the book very briefly. I saw it last night, somebody showed it to me. India-China Relations in a Changing World, Between Cooperation and Conflict. That's the title of the book that is displayed outside. Now, if you look at cooperation and conflict, there are two ends of a polarity between which relations can slide from one extremity to another. And this doesn't really capture the India-China relationship, given the complexities that it has, given the regional and international issues that we have to address increasingly with our growing weight in the global economy. So the international relationship which intersects between India and China can be captured also by the words coexistence and convergence on a range of issues. And there are many ways of seeing where this convergence is headed. Both Indian and Chinese specialists talk about the need to replace. There was a world of superpowers between 50s, 60s, 70s, lasted till the disintegration of the former Soviet Union. And then you had a brief unipolar moment in the world. And now the Indian and Chinese leadership say that we are going towards a multipolar world. I don't like that word, frankly, because it is polarity is again at two ends. Many others have different descriptions for it. Amitabh Acharya calls it a multiplex world. But whatever you call it, the day of a single power dominance is over. And India and China have now embarked on a relationship, we are conscious of it, which is a relationship of major powers. We are working towards it. This is a phrase which was mentioned when our Prime Minister went to China last year in May. And it is a little bit different from what we perceive China's other big foreign policy goal of achieving a great power relationship, a new type of relationship between China and the United States, which is at another level. And in India there is a understanding of it, some suspicion of it also, just as in China there is suspicion about where the US-India relationship is going. Similarly, there is a suspicion in India about where the China-US relationship is going. Is it that they are striving to be co-equals in the world to manage not just Asia-Pacific affairs, but also global affairs, because this is something which no Indian leadership can countenance. The popular discourse in India is, of course, of a conflictual relationship. So if you were to watch television in New Delhi, you will get a very wrong notion of how the India-China relationship is developing. But at the level of leadership, right from the time of our former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China in December '88, that was a marker. And from then on to the recent exchanges, including Xi Jinping's visit to India and Narendra Modi's visit to China in 2014 and 2015, there is a different equation between our leaderships. There is a new energy also that the two leaders are bringing to the relationship, because they are both forceful personalities and they are able to put their stamp on the direction that our policies will take. So I have not much time. In 5 minutes I'll just touch the main contours of where we are. Since the 62 war between India and China, we have come a long way. There has been no firing across the line of control for over 25 years and no casualty in 40 years. There has been an arrangement in place in the border regions for peace and tranquility, beginning with a 1993 agreement, and then there were confidence building measures which soon followed, and they have been buttressed further in 2013, which we call border defense cooperation. Chinese openness in helping India join the SCO and supporting our candidacy to join APEC are welcome steps. We have a dialogue now with China on the future of Afghanistan, bilaterally and trilaterally also with the Russian Federation. One way in which we can strengthen the border management further, if India and China were to exchange maps, because to this audience I want to explain that we have a line of actual control, no line of control, because the patrolling parties of India and China don't actually know in the disputed area where precisely the border lies. And luckily our borders are in the Himalayas, and so we don't have constant border patrols there all the time, but there are some disputed points. And so when the Chinese patrol and Indian patrols come face to face, there is like a friendly tug of war. There is a lot of pushing and shoving, and all that also can be avoided if maps were exchanged, because the Chinese believe that the border issue can be settled only when they judge that the Indian leadership is prepared for a final settlement. And so really serious talks have not started on that, but there is no need to go there right away. We can improve things dramatically if this small adjustment is made. There's a lot of misgivings in China because of something new that India did in January 2015 when President Obama visited India, and US signed a joint vision statement for Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean. And the document speaks of accelerated infrastructure connectivity between Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, ensuring freedom of navigation in South China Sea, avoidance of use or threat of force in settlement of disputes, and strengthening the East Asia Summit process. And this is a slight point of discordance, because when Xi Jinping spoke in the Chica conference about a new security architecture in Asia, the fulcrum was Chica, and for us the fulcrum is the East Asia Summit. And so there is a slight divergence of opinion there. I think the real problem arises when this statement is read in conjunction with the direction of the India-US relationship overall, which includes also stronger defense, security and economic cooperation and strengthening of bilateral naval exercises such as the Malabar. None of these initiatives, by the way, are new, and I want to emphasize this, that we have had this developing over a period of time, and we have tried to strengthen relations with Japan, Australia, Vietnam, South Korea, and with ASEAN states, including now we are making an effort with Indonesia. So India's contestation and cooperation with China will go hand in hand. And India has never contemplated containment or an alliance strategy directed against China. Indeed, India wishes the opposite, to comprehensively engage with China exactly in the same way that United States wishes to do. So here I think we are on common ground. I wanted in the last 5 minutes that I have to quickly touch on the future possibilities of where we could go from here, and there the potential is tantalizing. Our Prime Minister is a very frank person, so when he went to China, he had a seminal presentation at Tsinghua University, where he said that if we have to realize the extraordinary potential that exists between India and China, and for forging a very different type of major power partnership, we must be ready to discuss issues that lead to hesitations and doubts and distrust. And we must address these frontally. And what are the great possibilities? The great possibilities are the efforts that we in India ourselves are making in forging greater connectivity in the South Asian region, connectivity of trade, transportation. We are building energy grids with Nepal and with Bangladesh, and we hope to spread it to different parts of South Asia. The ICT connectivity, and most of all the people-to-people connectivity. Many of you may not know, but between Bhutan and India and Nepal and India, out of a resident population of 29 million Nepalese, 6 million live and work in India under national treatment in India. And we have a reciprocal treaty obligation for Nepal, for Indians to work in a similar way in Nepal, but we don't use that. And we don't have Indians working in Nepal or buying property in Nepal as Nepalese nationals. So this is a one-way reciprocal, non-reciprocal gesture. This can gel with the emblematic Chinese initiative of One Belt, One Road, which we see as a combination of the SREB and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, which converges interestingly at 2 points in the globe. One is in Western Europe. The SREB and the MSR come together in Europe and in Pakistan. And there it's a great opportunity because as we see it, Pakistan has served to keep India busy in South Asia. But now China's interest in Pakistan is global because of the One Belt, One Road, because it gives China access to the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. And therefore, China has a great stake in trying to have a salutary effect on Pakistan in terms of its outlook towards India, which is to oppose India, to have a Boolean identification of their national aspirations in terms of being the opposite of whatever India does. And that might begin to change Pakistan. China's direct involvement in Afghanistan is something India welcomes. China put a notional investment of $3 billion in the Anna copper mines. We are very happy to also invest in Afghanistan, and Indian firms bid a $10.5 billion. They were the L1, the lowest bidders for the Hajigak iron ore mines. But India will only go to Afghanistan if China goes to Afghanistan. It will be on the back of Chinese investment. What is a little bit disquieting is that Xi Jinping visited India, Narendra Modi went to China, but there was no statement made by the two leaders and no serious discussion on this emblematic Chinese initiative. And this is something that is missing because the One Belt, One Road touches India's periphery but doesn't involve India. It comes to the east of India through the BCIM, what is called the Kunming Initiative, and it touches Pakistan, but touches Pakistan in a north-south axis. But China is aware of our equities in Afghanistan, our relationship with Iran, our growing relationship where China is very strong in Central Asia. If Afghanistan is to be stabilized, which is China's aspiration, because without that Pakistan cannot be stabilized. Our worry in Afghanistan is not the disturbance within Afghanistan itself, but if that experiment fails, this time, unlike in 1995-96, it will prove very costly to Pakistan, and for India it will create far greater security problems than we would face just with the disintegration of Afghanistan. So the stakes for both India and China are very large in stabilizing that region, and we have a common interest in the progress and prosperity of Pakistan and the stabilization of Afghanistan. And I'll give you another very good example. The US dependence on Gulf oil is zeroed now. They don't need oil from that area. They will continue to maintain a presence there for geostrategic reasons. But for India, China, and also South Korea and Japan, our extreme energy dependence on the Gulf is going to continue. All the countries of Asia, the major economies, particularly China and India, have an absolutely common interest in the stabilization of this vast area that is currently in turmoil because of adventurous and absent-minded, I'm not saying willful, politics that has disrupted first Iraq in 2003, then 8 years later Libya, and now Syria. The whole of that region is in a greater state of turmoil than at any point of time since the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. And we have to step in and raise our coordinated approach to settling that area in inventive ways. We have not started talking about it yet. And last two big ideas. We have to start constructing the building blocks of a new security architecture in Asia. I referred to it. And this can be done easily because we have done it in the past historically. When the Southeast Asian nations were linked to both India and China from the time of the Sri Vijaya kingdom, let's say located in the Malay Peninsula in the 8th century, and that went on for 2.5 centuries, there was a Sino-Indic confluence in Southeast Asia which was predicated on commerce and culture. Conquest didn't have a role in it. And I think the Sino-Indic confluence is a prerequisite not just for building a new security architecture in Asia, but also in having a new type of a global relationship. And another big idea which India and China haven't even begun to address is joint energy projects, river basin development and environment management. Actually, it was an Iceland president who came to India who brought home this idea 3 years ago. He said it's an aha moment that struck him when he came to New Delhi. Aha means Arctic, Himalaya, Antarctic. And why he said aha is because he said that the greater Himalayas linking the Karakoram and the Hindu Kush is the third largest repository of ice and glaciers in the world, and we need to try to inventively manage it in a cooperative way. I want to, before ending, refer to India's vision of India's neighborhood. China is, of course, critical for India's global relationship, but our very first Secretary General in the Foreign Office was Sir Girja Shankar Bajpai, and when he articulated his vision of the Indian neighborhood, when he spoke of the landmass, it was between the Hindu Kush and the Arakans. But he was much more expansive when he spoke about the oceans, and he said that India's neighborhood extended from Suez to Shanghai. And some of the vision issues, some of the initiatives for the future that I have mentioned might seem very ambitious, such as a trans-Himalayan partnership on environment and energy. But if we believe in a cooperative framework of relationship, which is also part of Xi Jinping's initiative on OBOR, this is a task in which we should engage, because that would not only transform our national futures and strengthen our ongoing transformation, but it would also improve relationships globally. I thank you.
First, thank you, Kishore, for your very kind and graceful introduction of me. I really don't remember the event at Davos. Thank you for reminding me of that. And also, I want to thank you for your comment on my last-minute heroism to present in front of a very knowledgeable audience on the topic China-India relationship, which I know very little or almost nothing about. So I would like to speak as a layman or a lay woman because just to voice, to present some of my general, some very spontaneous thoughts on this topic. And I think my spontaneous thoughts on this issue might give you a very, maybe a not very professional, but a genuine picture of what the Chinese people, ordinary people or public, thinks about this relationship when they were asked to talk about it. I have 3 points. The first is China and India are great nations, and they can be great together. China and India are great for their 5,000-year civilization. They are great for their huge populations amounting to 1.3 and 1.2 billion. Together, they make up more than 1/3 of the world's population. They are great for the vast territory they have. They are great for their fast-growing economies. China had sustained a double-digit growth for decades. And even though the economy slowed down, it still had a 6.9% growth last year. And India, as the seventh largest economy in the world and the second largest in the BRICS, has outpaced China last year by achieving a 7.3% growth. India and China are not only great individually, they also share their greatness in the past and at present. Both had their independence in late 1970s after the Second World War and in the global trend of national self-determination and decolonization. China will not forget that India was the first to recognize formally the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. They together codified the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and contributed that to the historic Asian-Africa Conference in Bandung in 1955. They are partners and active players in many regional and global affairs. They are members of the BRICS, both of them. They are members of the BASIC. They are members of the SCO, the East Asia Summits, and G20, and many other forums. India has joined the China-initiated AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and is a major, maybe the second largest contributor to the funds of that bank. They share a very robust trade relationship. China is India's largest trade partner with a trade volume of $71.2 billion last year. They together had the largest overseas student bodies in the world. And in many countries, the largest international student body is either Indian or Chinese. For example, the US has the largest international student body from China, and the second largest is Indian. And in the United Kingdom, the largest international student body is Indian, and the second largest is Chinese. However, my second point is that great nations have their problems. Although the highest mountain range in the world have not separated India and China physically for thousands of years, a border war in 1962 had divided the two great peoples psychologically. The memory of that war still lingers, and reports about border disputes frequently made newspaper headlines. They share a neighbor, Pakistan, but they have very different relations with this neighbor. China has an all-weather strategic partnership with Pakistan, while India had fought wars with it in the last century. They compete in their course of economic development. China is expected to slow down in the future, and China actually has already began the slowdown process. India is expected to speed up by more than 7.5% annual growth in the coming years. As one Indian officer says, India is ready to take the relay baton from China and lead Asia's economic growth. The trade between the two is not very balanced. In last year, India's export to China is $9.7 billion and China's export to India is $61.7 billion. India has a 51.9, almost 52 billion trade deficit. They have a nuclear relationship. Personally, I'm not very worried. I'm confident that China and India would never go to a nuclear war for the reasons that both regard nuclear weapons as political instead of military tools. Both adopted a no first use policy and both focus on building retaliatory instead of first strike capabilities. They have concerns over regional architectures. China is concerned by the discussions in India about a possible Asian NATO. India is worried that China has conjured up a string of pearls strategy to encircle and fetter India by developing closer relationships with India's neighbors and by building military bases around it. India views Chinese One Belt, One Road initiative with suspicion, and China warily studies India's look east and act east policies and its stronger ties with Japan, Vietnam, Australia, and ASEAN. We can have a very long list of the issues that we do not agree with each other. However, for example, India says South China Sea is not China's sea. India has a freedom of navigation is also India's interest. And China does not think the Indian Ocean is India's ocean. And it has participated in the international efforts of fighting pirates and protecting sailors of communication. Some Chinese media highlights the fact that India had an aircraft carrier long before China has. And Indian newspapers alert the public that China is far ahead of India in space technology. So now given the fact that China and India have problems, how to deal with them, and that makes my third point, that great nations such as China and India has to think great and act great. First, economic developments must be the overriding agenda in this relationship between China and India. China has adopted an economy-centric grand strategy since 1979 and formulated a three-step strategy in 1987 that guides China's development up to 2050. It's an 80 years grand strategy. This strategy provided very long-term vision for China to devote to economic growth, to the improvement of its people's life, and to the building of a prosperous, strong, democratic, and modern society. China has just concluded its annual Congress the day before yesterday, which passed the 13th five-year plan. This plan will be the last one leading to the second step goal of building a comprehensively well-off society by 2020. That's the second step, the three-step strategy, the second step objective. If the two great nations keep their priority on economy, their interest could overlap mostly, and the desire for cooperation could certainly override the desire to compete or even to confront. The second is to avoid the enemy assumption and the zero-sum thinking. China and India had fought a war more than half a century ago, but they had never really been enemies. India and China are rising simultaneously, side by side, but not at the expense of each other. They sometimes compete because they are similar. They are more or less at the same level of modernization. They depend on population dividend. They are big energy consumers, and the made in India is catching up with made in China. However, looking from a positive perspective, the relationship can be made complementary. China is strong in infrastructure, which is what India needs. China's labor force is aging, and Indians is much, much younger. China is restructuring its economy and dealing with excess manufacturing capacity. Its investment could help overseas, could help Indians' industrialization. And China's economy is changing from an investment-driven model to a consumption-driven one, offering vast trade opportunities to India. If the relation is assumed to be friends, to be between friends, we will be more constructive, cooperative, and comfortable with each other. Third, China and India must have the will and the way to control their differences. For example, both sides have agreed that the border issue must be solved peacefully and through negotiations. As rising powers, India and China gives priority to independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Negotiated compromises might be harder to achieve in the near future, but we have to keep the negotiating process and narrow the gap little by little. Meanwhile, we should make every possible effort to manage the disputes and prevent conflicts by setting up rules of engagement, by having border consultation mechanisms, by sharing information on unexpected incidents, by opening up communication channels and create more frameworks for exchange and contact. CBMs like this help to stabilize the border situation and reduce unwanted incidents. Fourth is to expand exchanges and contacts. High-level visits, dialogues at every level and on every topics, timely exchange of ideas between leaders, academics, and more people-to-people contact will all help to reduce the suspicion, the misgivings, and the concerns for the two countries. For example, I think people-to-people contacts are still not very robust because I'm in the China-US relation studies. The people-to-people exchange last year, the American and the Chinese travel to each other's country. The number amounts to the number amounts to 5 million, but between China and India, it's less than 1 million. It's only 900,000. And actually, every day, 17,000 people fly between China and the United States across the Pacific. So I had the pleasure to visit India for only once, and it was last December, and it was an eye-opening trip for me. I had a chance to see a country with my own eyes for the first time, and I had many new. I think I had a better understanding, and I had a chance to correct some of my wrong impressions before. Last is that India and China cooperation must go beyond bilateral relations. Great nations have impact and influence that beyond their borders, which they must put to good use. It is also their responsibility to promote peace and not only their responsibility, but their interest to promote peace and development in their periphery, regionally and globally. When working together, they can reduce each other's concerns, such as an Asian NATO or a string of pearls strategy. And more importantly, they can shape Asia's future, from which all players in this region can benefit. China and India have joined hands in many international affairs, and in the future, there will be more opportunities to work together. Like Jayant said, that climate change, also dealing with air pollution. My only trip to India helped me to realize how bad New Delhi and Beijing suffers from smog. And we have a shared challenge here, and we have a shared opportunity. And also in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, in maritime search and rescue, in counter-terrorism, in the protection of salient of communication, exploration of new energy, and so on. So there is really a lot of area, a great potential for our two countries to work together. When working together, great nations like India and China can make the region great and the world better. Thank you.
Let me begin by saying I'm amazed, Jayant and Yunju had very little time to prepare the presentations, and yet they were so brilliant. So another round of applause for both of them. Let me try to briefly compliment their remarks, and then we'll come up to the stage and have a Q&A session. And I'm going to make 3 points. So my first point is going to be about the changing world, the big title over there. Second point about what I see as the state of China-India relations. And the third point, a word about the future. So let me begin about the changing world. And the problem about speaking about change is that change has become such a cliche that we all assume that we are ready for change. But to make my first provocative point, I think our minds have become very lazy, and we are reluctant actually to admit how much the world has really changed. And to give you a small, concrete example, in a sense to wake us up, just imagine something which was considered impossible. I know this. It was considered impossible 6 months ago, and is now going to become possible in 8 months. And what's that impossibility that becomes possible? That possibility is a President Donald Trump. I know you're all laughing. Everyone thinks this is a joke. But I can tell you in Davos in January this year, when David Gergen, probably one of America's foremost political analysts, stood up and said at a private lunch hosted by Larry Weymouth, the daughter of the founder of Washington Post, he says, don't rule out the possibility that Trump will become the nominee, and indeed that seems very likely. Don't rule out the possibility that Bernie Sanders might become the nominee, that seems unlikely now. But he says, don't rule out the possibility that Trump could become president. Now, leaving aside the question about whether or not he actually becomes president, surely what is more important for us to understand is what is the nature of the political soil that has created this Trump phenomenon. Trump may go, but the political soil is still there. And what's the meaning of that political soil? Now here you're talking about something very profound. Because one reason why we have, by and large, a relatively stable and peaceful world today, where the prospects of a World War III are practically zero, where trade and commerce continues to grow, where there's no war between any two major powers. All this is because of a remarkable architecture and a sea of norms that the West has gifted to the world and the West has taken care of. And Western leaders could take care of this global order because there was an alliance of views between the Western leaders and the Western populations. The Western populations accepted the fact that their countries had a certain responsibility to maintain and sustain the global order. So they were in favor of WTO, they were in favor of IMF and World Bank, they were in favor of free trade, they were in favor of TPP. But now, as you know, despite the fact that the TPP, frankly, will bring huge benefits to the American economy, Obama's chances of getting it passed before the elections are zero. And whether or not you'll actually pass it, even the lame duck session, is a huge question mark. So you can see how we are living in a world where all the assumptions that we had about our world order are no longer valid. And yet it's so difficult to persuade people to start thinking about a different world where suddenly the traditional leaders of the world order walk away from it, and we all assume that a world order will continue automatically without any maintenance, without any leadership. That's not possible. Somebody is going to become the custodian of this world order. And if you look at it very simply, very objectively, and you ask the question, if the United States and Europe walk away from this world order, and it could happen, who could possibly step into the place? And there are only two countries that are large enough, big enough, integrated enough, and big enough beneficiaries of the world order to step on and do the job, and that's China and India. And so clearly, the common interests of China and India in maintaining this order are going to grow significantly. And the global demands for China and India to provide leadership are also going to grow significantly. And I find it very worrying that so few Chinese, so few Indians are thinking about the responsibilities coming their way. So I hope that one thing that I hope our seminar can do is to emphasize this fact. Now, my second point is about the possibility, as I said, of China and India working together. So, can they? And here the answer, I must say, listening to both General Yao and Ambassador Jayan Prasad, you can see that it's a very complex and very difficult relationship. There's the baggage of history, there's references to the 1962 war, there have been problems at the border, and so on and so forth. But what is, I find, missing, at least in the public discourse, I know in private there's a lot more serious discussions going on, is an effort to calculate whether on balance, if you do a rational, objective audit, would China and India be better off competing or cooperating more? And here, it is not rocket science. In fact, as far back as 2007, 9 years ago, Tarun Khanna, a Harvard professor, wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review called China plus India, the Power of Two. And he gives example after example of how, in a sense, if these were two rational economic actors, both would benefit significantly from doing more with each other in the economic dimension. Our problem, of course, is that the human beings are often not rational economic actors. We get swayed by emotions, we get swayed by, little things, and we lose sight of the big picture. So here I hope, and I'm glad that in both their presentations, Jayan and Yunju pointed to the common interests that China and India have. And I would actually argue that of all the relationships in the world today, of all the bilateral relationships in the world, the one where you have the greatest gap between the potential and the performance is the gap in the relationship between China and India. There's so much they could do together in the economic dimension, and there's so little that they do together. And by the way, paradoxically, even though the US and China, as you know, see each other also as competitors, it's amazing how integrated their economies have become. It's amazing how large their trade flows have become. It's amazing how they work together in so many areas. So this is a paradox here. In theory, China-India relationship should be easier one than the US-China relationship, but much less is done on the substantive front. So I hope that the gap between the potential and the performance will be addressed. Now let me conclude with a suggestion for the future. And my suggestion for the future is that the paradox here is that the best way for China and India to have a great future is to study their past. Because if you look overall at the past 2,000 years of history, for most of it, the relationship within China and India has been remarkably peaceful. And I may be wrong, but the only major war they fought was in 1962. Right? And yet, all the focus is on 1962, and 2,000 years of history is erased. Now, there was a reference to it in both, again, Jayan's and Yunju's comments. And in this article that I referred to Tarun Khanna, he says that as far back as the 1930s, a scholar in Beijing University, she said that the 6th century marked the Indianization of China. So, and Jayanth, you referred to the Sri Vijaya And how about the China-India confluence, a peaceful confluence in Southeast Asia? So why do we keep talking about 62 and so little about the centuries of and millennia of collaboration that we've had in this region? And here I would say, in some ways, since our minds are so much programmed by the modern world, we tend to look at the 20th century as the most critical century in human history. But both the 19th and 20th centuries were essentially distortions of human history, because a very small corner of the world, Europe, managed to occupy, conquer, and dominate the entire planet and gave us certain historical perspectives. But now we have to change our minds, switch off the 19th and 20th centuries and go back to the first 1800 years. And when we do that, we will see the China-India relationship in a very different light. Thank you.